Last night, riots erupted after a pair of deadly shootings. Here are my observations. It's impossible to know all the facts this fast, but in the world of social injustice, one can't afford to wait. After terror, our leaders say, don't jump to conclusions, but not in these situations. Why is that? Fact is, humans lump unique acts together if it suits them, meaning no matter how different Tulsa was from Charlotte, it's easy to form a theme out of both, making it less complex and more black and white, even if a police officer and victim happens to be black. What drives each act, though, is compliance. Once that first step goes south in a traffic stop, it creates a cascade of actions that can go south as well. The Tulsa and Charlotte shootings are way different, but they all started in one place: perceptions of noncompliance. And reactions ramp up as part of training. Each time an officer, black or white, confronts someone, noncompliance triggers the training, the adrenaline, the fear, the unbending mind of law enforcement. Last, compliance doesn't just apply to cop work, but to life, to us. Lately, it seems we're abandoning any form of conflict resolution. We can't discuss this stuff without retreating to specific sides. We've all been there in our own unbending minds, where emotion transcends truth. And so violent protest seems less rare these days, as media and activists green-light it as a replacement for reason. Facts become annoying hurdles to action. I just want to play a clip of Chief Kerr Putney from the Mecklenburg Police Department. He's describing yesterday's shooting of Keith Lamont Scott, which is a far different shooting than Terrence Crutcher, which is, when you look at that video, is incredibly disturbing. But here is Chief Kerr Putney talking about Keith Lamont Scott, the shooting of him.
He exited the vehicle armed with a handgun. The officers observed him get back into that vehicle, at which time they approached the vehicle to engage this subject. The officers gave loud, clear, verbal commands, which were also heard by many of the witnesses. They were instructing the subject, once he got out of the vehicle, to drop the weapon. In spite of the verbal commands, Mr. Scott, as I said, exited his vehicle armed with a handgun as the officers continued to yell at him to drop it. He stepped out, posing a threat to the officers, and Officer Brentley Vinson subsequently fired his weapon, striking the subject.
So, Juan, when you hear about how that unfolded and how different it is from the Tulsa shooting, where the man is unarmed and it looks really bad, it tells me that these things cannot be grouped together, because when you group these events together, you create a storyline that leads to things like riots or like Dallas, unfortunate events that emotion drives them to wrong answers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think, obviously compliance is key, because I've said this to my sons, one of whom has a heavy foot on the gas pedal. Hey, if a cop stops you, you got to keep your hands in plain view. You got to be respectful. I've heard people on this network say, oh, gosh, why would you say such a thing about police? But let me tell you, if you're black, you say such a thing to your kids about police. So compliance is very real. Now, the other side of this, as we saw in the Tulsa shooting, right, but we've also seen in Minneapolis this year, I believe it was Minneapolis, yes, where the guy was in the car and he says to the officer, I'm reaching for my wallet, yes, I have a permit to carry a gun, and he still gets shot. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of fear on behalf of people like myself that, you show up and it's, let's say you've had a couple drinks, Greg. Let's say your medication is not right, and so a cop says, hey, you better do this, and you're slow or you look a little stumbling, and suddenly, yeah, bam. Like, what did I do? Mm-hmm. You're suddenly, this is what the sister of the guy in Tulsa said. Right, that brown skin, and especially if you're a male and if you're large, suddenly you're criminalized. Just the sight of you is taken as significant threat to the officer. You're talking about, right, officers responding because they feel threatened, and I'm very sensitive to that. I think I wouldn't want to be one of these officers. I praise God for having officers who do such a difficult job. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying, as a citizen, it hurts me that I have to fear for myself, my family, my children when we deal with police.
Yeah, but Kimberly, the idea of grouping these stories together as like when you look at Tulsa, you could see how horrible that is, and you could see that perhaps there were choices that shouldn't be made, obviously. But you look at this other one with Mr. Scott. He was armed. I mean, when we group these things together, we eliminate facts to create a story, and that to me is dangerous. And you eliminate meaningful discussion based on the unique factual circumstances of each situation. So you might arrive then at the wrong narrative, and it's grouped together, and people can easily misplace the facts from one and attribute it to the other story. There isn't the clarity, the focus, and the learning moment that you might have to be able to talk to the people, talk to the public, explain the circumstances without prejudging the other situation. Say, well, this is just a big problem, this is an epidemic in this country, and here's 2 more examples. But they're very different in terms of the facts and how it played out and ultimately the end conclusion. Yeah, Jesse, it is the other issue I find here is when they ascribe intent to these shootings, as though a police officer wakes up in the morning and decides, this is how I want to end my day. It's not like terror, where a person goes out, plants a bomb because he wants to kill people. The police officer, the black officer in North Carolina, didn't wake up and say, I'm going to go out and shoot somebody. Yeah, police save lives for a living. They don't take lives for a living. But let's look at the facts here. There's a narrative out there that police are just killing unarmed black people. Just in 2016, police killed 702 people. Only 163 of them were black. That's only 23%. So that narrative is out the window. And if you look at the facts of this case, this guy Scott, he had a DUI conviction. He had an assault conviction. He was armed. He didn't obey commands. He was shot, a black man, by a black police officer. But the Nation of Islam comes into the scene and says, black people in Charlotte need to now boycott all white businesses. That makes no sense. Then, which contributes to the riots, the daughter of this victim does Facebook Lives and say he was just reading a book. So that's one of those hands up, don't shoot narratives that's false. They recovered no book, and the thing goes viral, and now people are rioting. Martin Luther King never rioted. He never looted, and that's one of the reasons he was so effective. So if black Americans have such a problem with police officers stereotyping them as criminals, the reaction shouldn't be to then go commit criminal acts out in the street, loot, and cause mayhem. More people from Rahami's hometown are speaking out about what he was doing on the day of the bombing.
All right, Lydia Serrano live in Elizabeth, New Jersey, outside Rahami's home. Lydia.
Good evening, Steve, right here. This is where Rahami worked. It's also where he lived upstairs, and we are now learning that just 2 days before the Chelsea bombing, he was actually setting off, igniting an explosive in the backyard. Then right here, we also learned that on the day of the bombing, Rahami went into the salon. He just acted normal?
Yeah, he normal. I say, what happened? You had a party? He said, no. That's it. He not talk too much.
Barber Mario Barreo is talking about Ahmed Khan Rahami, the accused terrorist behind the Saturday bombings in New Jersey and New York. Barreo says he saw Rahami just hours before the Chelsea bombing here at Sonia's Beauty Salon. The salon is next door to where Rahami lived and worked at his family's business.
I go to, the store, buy water, sometimes food. He maybe practiced the bomb over there on the back.
You never heard anything?
No.
Barreo says around 3 p.m. Saturday, Rahami came in with 2 men and 2 women. The women were dressed in Muslim garb. The 2 men received haircuts and trimmed their goatees.
This day, 3 o'clock, he looked relaxed.
The FBI released this surveillance image today of 2 unidentified men who apparently made off with a bag that contains one of the explosive devices on 27th Street, allegedly planted by Rahami. Police insist they are just witnesses at this point.
We've looked at the video quite a number of times, and it shows that they were out walking along the street. They saw the bag on the sidewalk. They admired the bag. They opened the bag. They removed what turned out to be a device, a pressure cooker.
A lot of confrontations with his father.
Julino Montero is a friend of Rahami's older brother and has known the family for years. Rahami's father says he called the FBI on his son 2 years ago. Montero says the family has long-standing issues with Rahami.
He had a baby with a Spanish girl, this guy. Yeah, a Dominican girl.
And so there was a lot of issues there.
The issues start like that. So the father, nobody like him, so he has to go back to his country, and he got married with a girl from Afghanistan.
Asiya Bibi Rahami married Ahmed in 2011. She left the U.S. for Pakistan months before the bombings. We've also learned that just 2 days before the bombings, Rahami was filmed igniting a device here in his home's backyard in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And according to the FBI, Rahami also bought bomb-making materials between June and August using his own name, and he's also accused of having a YouTube account where he favorited jihadi-related videos. That's the latest here in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I'm Lydia Serrani, Fox 5 News.
4点54分，无锡市朔放街道强宅路220号的2层楼房因液化气泄漏引发爆炸，造成多间房屋倒塌。事故发生后，当地消防、医疗、安监等多部门赶到现场救援。
这个空间比较狭小，然后呢，为了保证人员安全呢，我们不能使用大型的机械上去进行大规模的作业，要靠我们人力去进行去扒。
据了解，此次爆炸造成12间房屋完全倒塌，而爆炸产生的巨大威力将相邻多家房屋的玻璃门窗震裂，有的已经严重变形。门口一辆汽车的车窗玻璃也被完全震碎。 门前的马路上散落着大量的玻璃碎片。
城每户是，一共是12间房间。这些人呢是租了我们本村的那个住户，然后
经过6个多小时的搜救，救援人员共救出10人，其中5人抢救。
Well, it's video that is leading the FBI tonight to ask for help identifying these 2 men. They are wanted for questioning as possible witnesses in the weekend bomb blasts in New York and New Jersey. The man charged in those attacks is recovering from gunshot wounds. Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues is following this.
At 8:30 Saturday night, a pressure cooker bomb exploded on West 23rd Street in Manhattan. The FBI is appealing for help in finding these 2 men who were 4 blocks away on West 27th Street at the same time. Police say the 2 men removed a bomb from a piece of luggage, putting it on the sidewalk, and then walked away, leaving the device but taking the suitcase. The bomb never exploded. NYPD Counterterrorism Chief James Waters.
They are witnesses. There are no criminal charges. They're not in any jeopardy of being arrested. So if you can help us find them, or anybody else can tell us who they are, we'd be very interested to speak to them.
Investigators are still unsure if Ahmad Rahami was part of a cell or acting on his own, or if there are other bombs still unaccounted for. According to federal charging documents, Rahami bought the ingredients for the bombs on eBay, including chemicals, ball bearings, and electric igniters. The FBI is still trying to figure out where he built the bombs. But 2 days before the bombings, the documents say a family member filmed Rahami burying a small black cylindrical object in his backyard. A fuse is lit. There's a loud noise and flames, followed by billowing smoke and laughter. Today, at a counterterrorism hearing in Washington, Homeland Security Committee Chairman Michael McCall held up a copy of Rahami's handwritten journal.
He talks about, God willing, the sound of bombs will be heard in the streets. Gunshots to your police, death to your oppression.
Blood-stained with a bullet hole through it, Rahami wrote about martyrdom, and his praise of leading militants suggests he took inspiration from al-Qaeda as well as ISIS. A U.S. official tells CBS News that Rahami's wife is headed back to the U.S. tonight voluntarily. Scott, she spoke with investigators in Dubai.
Jeff Pegues, thanks for
tears.
They held him at gunpoint.
Stories.
Your voice still matters.
And signs. All ways this group of UNCC students are standing up and calling for change after a CMPD officer shot and killed Keith Scott just minutes away from campus.
I felt really troubled and really heartbroken, especially because it's walking distance from campus. You don't feel safe.
You came here and it was like the main goal was very to be respectful and talk about what happened last night so it wouldn't happen again.
We just really want people to know that we're here and it's real what's going on.
But this time we'll have remarks from our Chancellor, Phil Dubois.
The university's Chancellor, Philip Dubois, was also there, offering his support.
The fact that you're here today speaks more to the environment on this campus than anything I could ever do. So thank you for being here.
While the university's chancellor encouraged peaceful protests by students, he also said that he'll be looking into why students were alerted so late after the shooting happened.
My friends are getting tear gas.
Yes,
trying to
I had
go
friends
home.
out there last night.
Trying
tear
to go
gas.
home.
They got down on
and
their
I can't
knees,
even
hands
get a
up, tear
message
gas.
until this morning going to class.
They sent an email saying condolences to the victim of the shooting yesterday. That was about an hour ago.
We're going to review all that in kind of after the fact rundown, but my police chief makes that call based on what he knows at the time. And this activity was between 1 and 3 miles away. And so I don't think he would have known at the time that it had gone all the way to 85, which I think, did change things for people driving around, although it was in the wee hours of the morning.
At UNC Charlotte, I'm Caroline Fountain, Fox 46, Charlotte.
So with the task from the mayor in hand and his commitment to give us the resources we believe we need to execute our crime strategy, we came back and built our plan. And let me tell you, people, the mayor delivered for us. Over the next 2 years, we'll be adding 970 sworn positions. And that includes hiring 500 new police officers to help boost the police presence where it's needed most. This will make us a bigger department, better department, and a more effective department. If we want to stop the violence, we need to find and arrest the people that are responsible for it. If we want to earn the trust and respect of the people we serve, we need to take their pain seriously and investigate every crime as if it was a crime that happened to one of our own children. I'm the superintendent of police. I'm a crime fighter. That's what I do. All these people in here, that's what we do. I can tell you this, the mayor and I have had several conversations. He has assured me the resources and what he's committed to giving us will be there.
Turkey says its military incursion into Syria late last month intended to clear the Turkish border regions of Daesh terrorists and Syrian Kurdish militants and to stop cross-border Kurdish expansionist agenda. Ankara insists that any terrorist activity east of the Euphrates River is a red line for its national security. On the ground in Syria, the Turkish military has cleared Jarablus and Al-Rai and is now advancing southwards towards Al-Bab. Syria has reacted angrily to the Turkish incursion. However, Ankara envisages its military to infiltrate into a far greater area inside Syria.
Jarablus has been taken care of. Same thing with Al-Rai. It was clean too. And now we are going toward Al-Bab. Why are you going all the way over there? That's the question. We will go. We have to stop these places from posing threats.
In an interview in New York, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu revealed the reason for and the extent of Turkey's intervention in Syria.
Al-Bab and Raqqa should be the next targets. When you clean Daesh from this region, this 5,000 square kilometer could be a de facto safe zone for Syria.
While Turkey has been flouting a no-fly zone or a safe zone along its border inside Syria for more than 2 years, with both NATO and coalition partners, the proposal has never been endorsed. However, observers provide a deeper insight to a sustained Turkish military presence inside Syria.
The basic aim and the character of this operation of Turkey is to destroy the American-Israeli corridor of terror in the north of Syria. The aims of the Turkish armed forces today are in conflict with the U.S. Army. Given this conflict, the duration of the operation depends on the response given by the U.S. if they use their organizations like ISIL and PYD and other terror groups against Turkey.
To date, some 10 Turkish soldiers have died in the operation, known as Euphrates Shield, and reports are emerging that Daesh has already reclaimed villages from the Free Syrian Army since the operation began less than a month ago. Verenia Keat, Press TV, Istanbul.
The Rahami family today stayed out of the glare of media cameras that are camped out practically 360 degrees around the family's home and restaurant. But for one relative who ventured out to a downstairs deli, met by lobs of questions, no comment from him. But we are getting our first look as the FBI scoured the burned-out backyard where officials say Rahami detonated devices Thursday night, 2 days before the Chelsea bombing. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., at a Homeland Security hearing, clearer images were shown of the bloody and bullet-damaged journal the suspect Ahmad Rahami was carrying when he was shot by Linden police. And now the NYPD and the FBI have released this image of two men they say actually picked up the bag containing one of the pressure cooker devices on 27th Street in Chelsea.
We're very much interested in talking to them and finding out a little bit more about where they were and how they came upon this bag.
Police say surveillance video shows Rahami left that bag shortly after 8:30, about the time the explosives detonated on 23rd Street, injuring 31 people. They want to find these men and retrieve that bag.
It's part of the evidence and where it goes and what's in there. It has to be identified. So it could be a rich environment to pull other things from it.
And a day after Mohammed Rahami insisted he gave the FBI information 2 years ago about his son's activities, law enforcement maintains it took that information as far as they could at the time, and Rahami never made it to a watch list.
I'm sure, as in after every incident, our federal partners will go backwards through this case and reevaluate.
Joining us now from Edinburgh is Mr. Mick Napier from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Mr. Napier, it's great to have you with us here on Press TV's World News. Please talk to us about the continued aggression and violence that the Israelis are carrying out against the Palestinians on a day-to-day basis.
I think the main problem is, thank you for having me, I think the main problem is a failure of imagination in people, many people around the world, to really understand what's happening in Palestine. And if I can give a tiny example, I've seen Palestinians in Jerusalem forced out of their home by settlers from the USA. The Palestinians forced to live in a small piece of their garden in a tent in winter, while the settlers from the USA live in their home and jeer at them and insult them and miss no opportunity to show their hostility. And it's a microcosm of Palestine, that settlers are coming from around the world, dispossessing the Palestinians with great violence, killing, shooting, burning families, burning homes, burning farms, pumping sewage onto Palestinian communities, pumping sewage onto their farms. And the situation is one of extreme desperation. And you know, we in Europe are used to films of the French resistance opposing the Nazis, and of course everyone's on the side of those people who use violence against an illegal occupier, a violent dispossessor. And it's a failure of the imagination to realize that Palestinians are in a desperate strait as well. An insult is piled on to injury. While thousands of Palestinians are held as hostage in Israeli dungeons in a huge gulag, Tony Blair, when he was the representative of the UN, the EU, Russia, the so-called quartet, he called for the immediate release without conditions of a single Israeli invading soldier who had been captured by the Palestinian resistance. And he was utterly silent on the agony of thousands and tens of thousands of Palestinians who had loved ones languishing in Israeli dungeons. So it's not just that the Israelis are committing barbaric acts against the Palestinians on a daily basis, killing, shooting, and so on. It's that salt is rubbed in the wounds by the so-called international community. And I think it's terribly important in this situation that signals reach Palestine, signals reach Israel from around the world, that although this killing and crime is being committed against the Palestinians with seeming impunity, Israel is extremely vulnerable to the worldwide movement for boycott, divestment and sanctions. And they really fear an aroused world public opinion. But you know, Israel, the Palestinians cannot win militarily given the balance of forces. They're not just fighting a settler colonial regime that's quite vicious. They're fighting the EU, they're fighting the USA, which just gave $38 billion to their tormentors, and the UN seems utterly useless in this situation. So the balance of forces is massively against the Palestinians, but we can change that, and it's really beginning to change. We are quite pleased that Israel was kicked out of the biggest arts festival in the world as something tainted. And we're pleased that in California and around the world, people are beginning to move against arms factories that supply the Israeli killers, and to force their governments to begin to impose sanctions on the Israelis. So I think, you know, if somebody moved into my home speaking a foreign language and jeered at me and made me live in a garden, I would fight them. And it would be pathological and sick not to fight them. And I would tell my children and my grandchildren to fight them. Because this is the side of the oppressed and the side of justice.
Very well.
And really, decent people around the world have to join in order to shift the balance of power here.
Thank you so much, sir. Mick Napier from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign speaking to us.
You know, it was a rough night last night. A lot of angry protests in Charlotte, North Carolina, following the shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. This comes just days after another black man, Terrence Crutcher, was killed by police in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Authorities say both men posed an imminent threat and to responding to officers, but the families say the men were two more examples they feel of black lives not mattering. So, you know, I guess the question is, what do we do? What do we do about this? Because it seems that it's open. It feels sometimes like it's open season. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder, do you guys have any ideas?
You know, it's funny, my mom called me yesterday, and, you know, obviously I'm white. You know, my experience has not been that of an African-American in this country, but she was so bothered having a child and imagining being an African-American woman, having an African-American son or daughter that's 20 years old or, you know, out at night, and someone assuming that that person is doing something wrong just because of their color of their skin. She actually sounded really, for the first time, really bothered by this trend that's happening among police in the country. And I think that's something that people are waking up to. Maybe people who were hesitant to criticize law enforcement, because there's this perception that you can't criticize law enforcement at the same time stand up for the good that the police force is doing. No, you're standing up for the good in law enforcement when you criticize these moments where cops step out of line. You're standing up for what it means to be an American and what it means to be unified in this country. So people are waking up, and I loved that moment that she and I shared last night, because I think that's representative of what's happening around the country, and people are coming together, and they will come together more in the future.
Well, I think we need to consider each case and wait until things come back, because the other thing is it's easy when these are pasted all over the news to jump to conclusions about the law enforcement agents, the victims, everyone, and start telling our own narrative. And I think it's really important because I dated a homicide detective for years, and he tried to describe once the emotions involved when you're in these situations and how they're just humans, training or not. And I was asking him at one point, you know, a lot of people say, why don't they tase? Why don't they shoot to harm and all these things? He said, Sarah, if I'm standing there and you've got a gun, I'm not bringing a taser. Like, you know, there are moments where you're making a really quick decision. I'm not saying in these instances, again,
guy had his hands up.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is all these cases are unfolding in front of us, but he was trying to get me to understand that we make it sound so simple to just do this or just shoot. He's like, there are so many emotions, there's so much going on in those moments that wait, because sometimes, you know, it's a very tough situation on both.
But there's this feeling of intolerance going, you know, at the top right now from one of our candidates, you know. He speaks of in an intolerant manner, which only trickles down to people in the country who have a tendency in that.
This has been happening long before. This is not Donald Trump's fault.
It's not his fault exactly, but he's not helping.
But you can't.
You know what H. Rap Brown said? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Here's what I feel. I listen to all the voices, and I feel helpless. It gets me incredibly emotional when I think about it, and I think, what can I do? What can I do? And where I realize where I can start is at home, and that's what I try to do. And I was home this weekend with my boys, and they were talking and they were making jokes, and it wasn't necessarily racial jokes, but no matter what the joke, whether it's boy, girl, fat, thin, black, white, whatever, I'm listening, and I went, stop the jokes. And they went, Mom, it's a joke, everyone gets it, we're kidding around. I go, no, not when these things are happening in our country. We are to love one another. We are to love our neighbors as ourselves, and I will not tolerate you joking about that. And so I think I can at least do my part by helping the next generation and at least teaching my kids what is appropriate and inappropriate, and I don't want it in my home. I don't know what else I can do.
That's, you know,
you can speak out
that's
like you just did.
that what you just said is great, because you know what? Look, a lot of this, I feel, and this is just me, when people who are not black can say we see it, we get why, you know, that young the football player, I don't want to mispronounce his name.
Colin Kaepernick.
Kaepernick. We understand why. We get it. We understand it. You know, it's how he feels about what he's seeing in his country.
Right.
There is a problem. If people can just start that conversation with there is a problem, if law enforcement can say to us as people, all of us, listen, we're often nervous out there, and sometimes, you know, stuff happens. It does happen. We've got guns. We're scared because we don't know what's coming either. If it can become about how we help each other, that would really be helpful. What doesn't help is pretending it's not happening, or that it is somebody's fault, you know, or blaming something. You know, it's hard to, you know, we've said, get cameras on the police officer.
Yep.
So we say, here's the cameras. But people have to actually look and see what's happening. If you see a man who's walking and his hands are up and he doesn't look like people are going, come on, move. You know, if he looks like he's walking, we should question that. If he gets shot and he's like this, even if there is PCP on there, many people will tell you that's not PCP walking. That's not how PCP looks when it's walking. Not that I know a whole lot about it, but, you know, I can tell you that, you know, walking concentratedly straight forward, that's not what you do when you're high like that. So you have to, when we see these things, we have to say, you know, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Help us understand who you are as police officers so we can help you do your job and we don't feel like you hunting us. Because that's what it feels like sometimes. And I hate that feeling. I always try to, you know, be positive. But I came in this morning, I was not positive.
No.
I was not positive. I don't like being like that.
So do you think when, you know, when the Black Lives Matter thing goes out there and then what the people say, white lives matter, that shows an insensitivity to the, to the African-American community?
To me, wait, no. Here's what it shows to me. A slight bit of ignorance. Because it's not about, we know white lives matter. We know it. We've seen it. We see, you know, white suspects doing all kinds of stuff with guns and we don't see them get shot instantaneously. But we do see, we have seen a guy in an open carry state saying to the police officer, I have one, and he gets shot anyway.
That's right.
So there is a disconnect for us. We know white lives matter. We know this. We've always known it. We just want to bring up the fact that due to the kinds of racism that we've had to deal with in this country, that's been institutional racism forever, for as long as lots of people can remember. You know, because we live with that, we need to remind people, no, it's not okay to do this. Nobody is okay in this country with any of us being shot for no reason. The police are not okay with it. We as Americans are not okay with it. We're not okay, and that's what we need to say. We have to hold everyone accountable, even when it's not comfortable, whether it's a black cop or a white cop. We have to hold people accountable.
Sorry, to build on Joy's point, when I was hearing white lives matter or blue lives matter, I knew there was something off, but couldn't quite wrap my words around why is that so tone deaf. And I read into it, and this was an example that worked for me. When people say Black Lives Matter, they're not saying just Black Lives Matter. They're saying Black Lives Matter too. Like you add a to the end, not a just to the front. And that helped me understand.
There has to be an acknowledgement, though, that there's been a different experience. People have to acknowledge that African Americans in this country have had a different experience. It's like people who say to me, you know, oh, why is there a gay pride parade and not a straight pride parade? Well, I'll tell you why, because straight people haven't been discriminated against for decades and decades and decades. So that makes no sense. There's a reason. African Americans in this country have suffered a different experience, and I think it's incumbent upon people who have not suffered that experience to not only acknowledge it, but to say things have to change.
And
that
to
falls on
acknowledge
us.
white privilege.
That
It's
falls
important.
on me. That falls on us.
Yes.
Okay.
We agree.
To me.
All right. I hear you. They hear you.